So the council, we spent a lot of time bouncing a statement around, and we released it before this meeting. We're sorry it took a little while, but I first became aware of some of the things that were in the article when I was interviewed for the article. So we are still at this point operating on the numbers and the information that we have had and that we based our decision on, and that we went through the due diligence with a very serious purpose and very careful attention to the results. And so I'm not discrediting EPA. I don't know who that guy is. I've never met him. We haven't heard from him as a board. And so it's important for the community to know, like, our place on this and our perspective on this is jolted a little bit right now, and we're trying to figure some things out too. But so we hope you'll see the statement and keep that in mind, because we're not bashful about the decision we made. There's nothing to hide about the decision we made. We're happy. We want to move forward. We don't want that kind of a thing in our community. But our interactions so far were then. Right now is now. So we do have concerns if there's additional costs, but that has not been transmitted to us by the EPA, by the administration, by a contractor, by anybody. So that's really important. Okay. The first one I have in my notes was concern about our reputation as a result of the article, but as a result of the decision and the project. I have the same concern, and it's interesting because when we made that decision, we made a decision that maybe most communities wouldn't make, which is to, remove a blighted property that has contamination that's right next to one of our most treasured resources, the Weaver River. I mean, I'm really proud of the community that would say, we're going to step up and we're going to protect that asset. I mean, can you imagine if these things make it into the river, what that would mean to our reputation? I mean, the cost would be astronomical. The impact, we'd be all over the headlines in the national news. It's such a bad travesty. So I'm still happy that we're taking action. I'm nervous about additional costs, but again, that hasn't been translated to us. So I really hope that we can focus on the reputation of the community that's investing in its natural resources, the sustainability of our river. And if anybody knows me, that's what I did for a living for a long time. So I'm still very, very proud of what is to come for there. Anybody else want to add to the comment about our reputation?
Chair, I kept hearing the mistake that was made, and I've got to say, I don't think it was a mistake. With all the information that was available to us, which is all anybody ever has, you make a decision, and I think we made the right one, based on partly on what you said. It is a asset for our community to protect the river, and even that parcel is an important thing. The riparian zone around that, from the river all the way around the development to the west, is an important asset to protect, that I think we have had a responsibility to do. We were not certain on the numbers of the cleanup. We took best case scenarios, worst case scenarios, weighed them the best we could do. We have seen some photos of that. All of this, by the way, did happen in the public view. It happened in a work session. It didn't happen on video, but it did happen on audio, and anybody could have seen what happened there. But it needs to be cleaned up. It's a serious problem over there. And we couldn't, in good conscience, just leave it to be dealt with.
I mean, in terms of dealing with it, we did deal with it here. We did take action here, but I'm still glad we're doing it. But I'm nervous about if there's additional costs. If that is indeed the case,
as am I.
That makes me nervous. I told the reporter that when I was interviewed. Hence my quote of, well, it's mixed feelings. I mean, the worse I hear about it being, I'm sure glad that we're taking action, because that's remarkably dangerous, right? None of us want that in our community, but And I think we're going to ask some of our own questions too tonight, so we can get some answers from the administration.
I think it's also important to kind of keep things in a bit of a perspective. When you're looking at a newspaper article, the media does tend to want to sell newspapers. They might leave out something that isn't quite as favorable to their urgency or their, to the article that they're publishing. So I think it's important, and I'm glad. That's why I'm really glad the citizens have come to ask us the questions rather than just assume. I hope that they'll read the release, the statement that has been put out by the council, though, because I think it does pretty well list the calendar and sequence of events and the reasoning that everything happened, and there was sound reasoning to do what we did.
Yeah, hopefully we conveyed our thoughts in a way that people
Chair,
can relate. Yeah.
if I have some comments, just, and it might lead into this. So I was chair at the time that this was all happening, and so I'll take responsibility for not communicating better. You know, since 2017 to 2019, as board member Heyer said, you know, we've gotten better. We're on Facebook. We're doing more communications. More people are able to hear us. But this was aired in the public, and I just want to say that you've all heard me talk about process, and I really believe that this was one that we went through a process. We listened to what we had in front of us. You know, like any old house, and many of you have done new houses and updated. You pull off the side of the house, and you realize that the back of it is trash. And so we did what we could to understand what was in there, and we knew there were issues. That's why when the appraised value was at $1.5 million, we came back. We knew there were issues. We knew that there was going to be demolition costs. We knew that there was crap in the building, and we tried to estimate what that was. And so that's why the offer was made at $400,000. I think that we were dealing with also a woman a wife that had just been widowed, and didn't even know what was in that building herself. And so it was a situation where, you know, if we had all that information today, it might be a different a story. But we had that information right at hand at that time, and I believe that, and still do, that the process was followed, and that that we made the decision that we needed to. We will continue to find crap. I hope that that it doesn't leak and leach into our waterway there. And I would encourage anybody who wants to have a conversation and is frustrated about it to call me. But like I said, I personally feel like we did communicate it in the public, maybe not to the best of our ability that we know now and how to communicate. So I encourage everybody to read the statement as well.
Mr. Chair, one of the questions that has come up both in the residence and even this evening is, the money that we have spent on the SWIFT, could we use other places? And I think it would be well for Brandon to maybe review where that money is coming from so that we have an understanding of that.
Yeah, I've got that one on my list. To respond to Marcia's comment too, I mean, you don't own any more blame than the rest of us. I appreciate you saying that.
Well, I just think that we need, you know, we know more about how to communicate
Right.
today than we did even then. And
Yeah.
so we're,
And we talk about process a lot. It's most often talked about when we're not following it the way we want, but that doesn't mean it's not ever followed. You know, most of the time it is. In this case, it was. For me, the remaining questions for me, if that were brought up by the article, it's the due diligence, it's the inspection. I mean, we were operating under the due diligence process that's there for that very reason. We did pull back on the original offer because the due diligence suggested it was far worse than we thought. And we did budget for what we thought was worst case scenario. So if that's no longer the case, it's worse than that, then, you know, I'm still not sure if that is the case, but you know, what's the process and the due diligence, and where can we tighten it up for the next go around? Because these are important matters. There's no question about it. So
I do have a comment if you don't mind.
yeah, please.
I just want to say that, I joined the council more recently than the purchase, but I'm really, really happy and relieved that the EPA is involved in the process. From what I understand of their cleanup procedure, et cetera, that, it's just more efficient. We know that the citizens are being protected. This is public information that's been out there since April that this has been happening. So I actually am really happy that they were engaged and involved in the process, even though I know some people are worried about that as well for other reasons. But for myself, thinking about the safety of the residents, the neighbors, the people that might accidentally go in there or go in there on purpose when they shouldn't be, etc. I'm really happy that we're remediating the situation and dealing with it up front.
Okay. Well, I think unless anybody has any more comments to share before we turn to the administration, I think there's going to be a lot of questions. Mark, if you're prepared to answer some of them for us.
We are, and I think we'll tag team this between Chief Matthews, who has probably more experience with toxic waste than any of us, and also Mr. Cooper and probably Gary Williams will chime in too. Let me just say at the beginning, having come from a newspaper family I never worked for a newspaper. Well, I did when I was young, but I recognize how difficult it is for a reporter to be able to become an expert on a subject so that they can write an article. And the article, as well as it could be written, isn't totally accurate and doesn't really reflect, I think, some of the conditions that are there. And that's one of the things that we're going to talk about tonight, if that's okay, is the conditions of what really was there that we were facing. I think the other thing is it's premature to assume that if it is a $2 million cleanup, that all of that would be paid for by the city. There is a lot of other sources that a lot of that money is going to come from. And there's things that have been found in there that they couldn't have gotten from any other place than the federal government. And so my guess is that there will be, and having EPA involved, I think it's a good thing because they can tap into the federal government line item to pay for some of those things easier than if we had gotten a different contractor to come in and make the remediation. So I'm going to start with Chief Matthews. I want him, we kind of prepared things just so that we had it on paper so that it made sense. We didn't forget something that was important. We didn't know you had released a statement. I still haven't seen it. So I will look forward to seeing that after the meeting. But we'll do this. Then we'll have Mr. Cooper. He'll respond. And then Gary can respond from up here if that's okay, if you don't feel that's disrespectful. And then all of us will be available to answer questions that we don't cover. Is that okay if we proceed that way?
Awesome.
Yep,
Thank you.
absolutely.
Chief? He wore his uniform, so he'd look more official.
So we'd recognize him.
Just for you, council chair, council members, and I think most importantly to the citizens that have brought this concern up. It's very much appreciative, and I want to start off by saying these comments, my intention is not to be defensive, but to provide information. We all know that in a newspaper article and the small amount of information that can be done, a lot of the story can't be presented. So you have follow-up questions and it stimulates thought. And the reason I'm here is because this is to me, a target hazard. As soon as I found out about this information from Brandon, we scheduled meetings with each of our shifts and we changed our approach and how we were going to approach this building in terms of if we had emergency in it. Whether it be a transient who was gaining access. This building was going from a boarded up building, warehouse of what we thought was military surplus, to a hazardous material waste site in a matter of days as it came to our information. We did not have any knowledge of the amount of volume of hazardous material or waste that was present in this building until we acquired it, and some of those assessments were done. From that point on, protection of firefighters, protection of the community, protection of the environment was our paramount concern. So when I found out that day at 4 o'clock that afternoon, our entire shift that would respond out there in initial alarm was out there in a meeting with Paul Perrinard, going through that building and becoming aware of it. By the next week, we had an archangel there because we wanted to make sure no transients were getting inside, and if so, we were going to protect them to the best of our ability, knowing with those known hazards. So we were very much focused on the public safety aspect of this. So this statement I'm going to read is going to hopefully clarify some of the questions that were aroused from that article, and hopefully put you at rest to some degree of that same information that you read in the article. Beginning April 1st, 2019, the Swift building had been predominantly a public safety hazard mitigation event. So as soon as Brandon and the CED had made their move, we kind of moved in, and we were kind of what we thought was the lead city entity working with them because it was an EPA cleanup site. Focus is centered upon protection of the community, EPA workforce, and the environment surrounding the property. As the EPA response unit began their activities, one of the challenges is illustrated in one of their first weekly reports. And I want to inform you, these weekly reports are public information. They have a website that has this site available, all public. I would encourage you to go read it tonight. It'll provide you with a wealth of information about what's gone on out there, what they're proposing to go on. It's all publicly available. Has been since day one. Their response objective number 2. The first objective was to air monitor the site to make sure as they were working, if they were exposed to any hazardous vapors, chemicals in the air, that they were properly protected. Their number 2 objective, and the reason I say it's number 2, is to remove debris and clear safe pathways and work zones. And I'll give you an idea of what I mean by that. During the week of 4/6/19, they removed 480 cubic yards of solid waste, 280 cubic yards of scrap metal for recycling. In and around all of this non-hazardous debris, 180 containers of hazardous waste was categorized. The picture I'm trying to create for you is the magnitude of trash and debris intermingled with the hazardous waste. And the reason I mention that is the size up of trying to determine how much was really there.
And were those barrels clearly marked, or were they just barrels?
There's
we didn't know
barrels.
if they were
This
hazardous.
was not a hazardous material manufacturing site. This was essentially a dumping site. So there's no rules at play here. Had this been a manufacturing facility of hazardous materials similar to Dice Chemical next door, they would have all of their information going to the LEPC, the Local Emergency Planning Committee. They would have reporting requirements. They would have requirements to show this is the containers, the amounts of size, how we mitigate a spill. All of that would be known by the local government. This was just a place where people put stuff, and they may have been properly labeled, they may not have.
No skull and crossbones.
And it's your guess if it's accurate. So 180 containers was categorized. This illustrates the volume of junk, trash, and debris intermingled with hazardous waste. By the first week of May, get this, 1,680 cubic yards of solid waste, 570 cubic yards of metal for recycling was removed in order to safely categorize 2,100 containers with potentially hazardous materials in them. What I mean by potentially is that the container appears like it could have, does, or has contained hazardous material in the past. To give you an example, within the second week, Paul called me and said, hey, we've got some containers that look like they contain military ordinances. Can you help me with that? Sure. We called Hillfield. We brought the bomb squad in from Hillfield. They did the research on the containers that appeared to at one point in time contain explosive ordinances. The initial assessment was there was something inside these containers. Went through the whole process out there. What they determined, they were all empty. They had water in them because they leaked and water leaked into them. But we had to go through all the safety precaution because we didn't know who put them there. Nobody could validate why they were there. It was a container that had explosive nature descriptions on the outside of the container. Hillfield guys researched and says, yeah, these were from World War II. But water was inside. There was no hazard, no danger. The process illustrates the magnitude of the challenge in knowing what was and is truly present on the site. The focus objective is to safely and effectively remove this target hazard from our community and environment, the Weaver River, the people in and around it. That's what we're there to protect. The city's determination to utilize EPA has already proven financially sound in terms of mitigation and cleanup. And I'll give you one example that they've done it here. You can read it on the site tonight. One example is they found 360 pounds of calcium hydride and 351 pounds of magnesium. And these were used militarily. So once again, going back to what Mark explains about who's going to ultimately be responsible about, that chapter has not been written, according to CERCLA. Of that amount of base, and it was dangerous, and if a typical third party had to take care of that, disposing of that, they would have to properly package it and then properly take it to a place where it could dispose. But because, since EPA was handling this and it has to be done to EPA standards, they met their own standards on site. They also found 125 gallons of sulfuric acid and 165 gallons of phosphoric acid, which had been abandoned on the site. Well, guess what they did? They used all that acid to neutralize all that base on site. So they used two wastes economically and neutralized that to render it non-hazardous. Didn't have to transport it off site. And they have very little byproduct they have to dispose of now that's been neutralized. This is just an example of how mitigating the cost. I talked to one of the reporters, not reporters, from the EPA. Because of the size of this site, they have to write a report on how well they interacted with the public and the community and so forth. And one of the things I asked the gal yesterday about how's it going, and she said one of the great things we're doing because we're here is we're using some chemists from the Navy, and all we have to pay is per diem. So that's going to keep the costs down. So they're taking advantage of everything they can because they know at the end of the day, whether it's federal, local, state government, it's government costs. They're trying to mitigate it the best they can, as cheaply as they can, as safely as they can. To date, none of this hazardous waste mitigation has caused injury or environmental contamination since efforts have commenced. Not one damage has occurred, not one mishap has occurred. We very much appreciate that. The pre-purchase inspection, you've talked about this, but I'll just read this briefly. There's been some speculation the city did not have the opportunity to inspect the premises before it acquired the site. That is incorrect. The city consultant inspected the premise during the purchase agreement due diligence period and estimated the cleanup scope before the city acquired the property. As a result, the inspection purchase price was substantially reduced, as you stated, from $1,085,000 down to $400,000. So a $700,000 reduction almost because of what additional mitigation costs were estimated. The container count. This is an important point for all the citizens to know and to hopefully put you guys at ease. Another issue recently raised was a difference in escalation of projected number of suspected containers found on the site. Initial reports were roughly 40,000. That 40,000 was through the Brownsfield assessment. The number is affected by a couple of things explained by EPA that wasn't put in the article. Talked to Paul today about it. Example, a sizable box on a pallet contains tubes of calcium hypochlorite. The tubes originally were to disinfect water for military. So they're out there and they needed to disinfect water for personal use. Within this big box that's on a pallet, there's 50 boxes in the one box. Within the 50 boxes, there's 12 containers or tubes that contain this calcium hypochlorite. In total, there were 5,400 of these containers. This size of a Sharpie. So when you look at why are we escalating in count of containers, one box turned into 5,400 containers. Because you don't go in and detailed inspect every single box, every single drum, every single container when you do a size up of the situation. You size it up. Now when you're into the weeds, one box contains 5,400 containers, all of which they took this, put it in water, burst it, turned it into chlorine bleach, neutralized it, rendered it non-hazardous. Example 2, EPA must categorize every container they check by their practice. The site has many military containers or other types that are simply empty. To date, the container count is at, and you can find us on the website. It's a really cool chart they put up on their website. As of last Friday, there was 41,355 containers. Now let me explain the breakdown of those containers. 12,596 were treated, so they had some type of hazardous waste. 14,630 were disposed of, thrown away. Oh, and 14,000 were empty. Paul told me today that he roughly estimates that 2/3 of these containers that they will analyze will be empty. These two examples explain why the estimates of the numbers of containers are growing. It's about semantics of definition. Every single container they have to check, they call it a container. From a public safety view, this is where I get a little bit goofy. The fire department appreciates the action of the city and EPA in its swift removal of this hazard from our city. Only took me about 3 seconds to come up with that. In speaking with the lead representative of EPA, he was on one site in Utah. He told me this today. One site in Utah, in another county, where it took 3 years to work with the private party that owned that property to do the cleanup. 3 years of having that risk present. You mentioned this earlier, mitigating, getting rid of it. We're going to get rid of a monumental risk in our community in 6 months because we acquired it. Now, I'm not talking about the financial terms. Those are things to be dealt with later, but just in terms of eliminating the risk as quickly as possible. That 3-year cleanup occurred after 4 to 6 years of legal litigation. So that site was contaminated for 9 years, working through all the legal maneuvering on a federal level, EPA, and with a private owner that didn't want to relinquish or recognize that they had a hazardous cleanup site. So we're doing it in a very short time. The determination of how the cleanup costs are apportioned to the responsible party is a matter of later determination. And that gets into the whole federal piece and the CERCLA and who owns whatever commodities have been found and who was the ultimate owner of that. Yet to be determined. And so the cost apportioned is not yet determined. Right now, the city is focused on protecting its citizens and the environment. Number one focus, and I think we're doing it, and I think EPA is doing it well. I can tell you about one other mitigation effort they asked me about today. They've got another item out there, some solid naphtha they want to get rid of. It's flammable. They have a concern. DOT classifies it as a non-hazardous material. There's 600 pounds of it, 600 gallons of it. They don't want to put it in the hazardous waste or into the regular waste stream. Not because they can't, but because they don't think it's a good idea, because any friction or any disturbance of it could start a fire. We could have a fire in the landfill. They said we think we can mitigate it much more efficiently. We can take it and dispose of it as hazardous waste and cost up to $10,000 to ship it to 3 states away because of the package, or we possibly can get rid of it on site, possibly burn it in small quantities on site. What they're doing is checking with the health department, DEQ, air quality, fire department from a risk standpoint to determine if that's a cost-effective, safe way of eliminating that particular hazard. We'll continue to work with them on mitigating this hazard. Paul said that today, he says that the city is extremely fortunate that the way they've handled this. He's not speaking in regards of the redevelopment portion of this issue. He's speaking in the process of you are eliminating a significant risk in your community in a very short period of time. Many communities have these, just like it was mentioned in the article, they said they correlated that another hazardous material site back in Maine that took 2 decades to clean up. Didn't take 2 decades to clean up. It took 2 decades of all the legal issues, all the arguing, all the other stuff, then the cleanup occurred. Wouldn't have taken 2 years to actually do the cleanup, or 20 years to actually do the cleanup. So just keep in mind that first 2,100 items that they categorized would have taken, an average cement truck holds 10 yards of concrete. That would have been 60 cement trucks removing debris before they could get to 2,100 containers to categorize what they have there. You can see the complexity and the challenge of this effort out there. And we very much appreciate from the fire department that this is being mitigated so we don't have anybody killed in this facility or we don't have an environmental catastrophe. Thank you.
Don't go far, Chief, in case there's questions. I just want to play what if for a minute. What if we hadn't bought the property? And if the owners before we bought it, who we bought it from, decided that the risk of how much it would cost to clean up didn't, then we would have put citizens at risk. We would have put the river at risk. We would have put maybe firefighters at risk. Because if that building had caught on fire and they had gone and fought the fire with what we've learned is it was in there, we could have had firefighters killed as a result. So even though that's maybe a damned if we do, damned if we don't kind of a scenario, but by purchasing it, we were able to begin to clean it up, where if we didn't purchase it, we didn't have control. One of the questions or comments that was made, I want Mr. Williams to comment on, and that is the ability we have to enforce on private property, especially when we don't know exactly what's there. And by the way, this property has had rumors since I was a little boy about what was in it. And we have found that the trainload of silver nickels we didn't find. That was one of the rumors over the years. So Gary, will you respond to what we can do, what we can inspect legally, and how we invite ourselves onto private property?
It is a complicated process. You have to have cause to go and get a warrant to go into the property. You have to have a basis for doing so. You could have called the EPA right away, and they might have used federal power to come in, but it would have been very much like the other county example that the chief gave, that there will be a long process, a battle over whether it is or isn't hazardous waste, and the inspection process, and whether they can dispose of it another way on their own, as opposed to the way the EPA would like to have it done. And so what we did in this case was control the project and therefore control the outcome.
I was in the building and at one time, and I didn't see half the barrels that they're talking about because there was so much clutter and so much stuff in that building. You couldn't see everything that was in there, and probably couldn't identify it. I think for the safety of our citizens, for the safety of West Ogden, I think we absolutely did the right thing. We're hoping for a really good outcome. We don't know what the outcome's going to be. And just to tell you, we're told that we might not know the outcome for a few years. The EPA has up to 3 years, I think, to come back to us to tell us how they're going to take care of things. So we don't really know how quickly that's going to happen, and we won't profess to you tonight that we know. We can tell you that Ogden is safer, the river is safer, the environment is safer as a result of what we did and the action that you took. We gave you every piece of information we had at the time. And we're coming today and giving you every piece of information we have at the time. And, you know, when the article came out, we've spent quite a bit of time sitting down and analyzing and saying, did we do the right thing? Are we doing the right thing? And I think we're convinced that we absolutely had the best interests of the citizens in mind. What the costs are going to be, we hope we can mitigate. We hope that enough of this will be charged somewhere else and our citizens don't have to bear the burden of it. But what's the price of a firefighter or a squad of firefighters or a couple blocks in West Ogden? What's the price of that? I can't establish a price on that. But I sleep a lot better knowing that a lot of this stuff has been taken care of by an organization that knows what they're doing. I don't know if we're ready for questions or if we've answered everything that you would wanted us to. No, Mr. Cooper won't feel bad if you don't have a question for him.
Mark, one question is that if we didn't step in and purchase the property, then this Smith family had the opportunity of selling this to another party. Would that be correct?
They could have sold it. They could have just sat on it. And I think it was a ticking time bomb from what I know. It worried me when I read the article. I didn't check with the chief to see if this is true, if we had 2 fires there when we had some of that stuff in there. I mean, we literally could have lost firefighters because they would have not been using the right substance to put the fire out. I mean, that's a really dangerous thing to be putting public safety at harm's way and other people in harm's way. So I'm grateful that we've gone forward. I think we followed instincts and we did the right thing to follow those instincts. So to answer your question, yeah, I hope that answered the question.
Yeah. So I just wanted, before we'll get to you next, Luis, I'm not happy if there's additional costs to the city at all. But I know in my day job and having worked in environmental remediation, not in the chemical side, but on the environmental remediation, the bureaucracy and the procedure, the cost, the length of time involved, I have always known of Superfund sites and remediations taking so long. But this process has forced us to reconsider decision we made. And we look at the information that we had, which was everything that you had. And that's, if I put myself in that situation again, I'm going to make that same decision. If I'm in that same position today, with the information we have today, I would be even more scared than we were when we were learning about this. I mean, let's be honest, this is a terrible thing, right? And if we had to consider city money at that time, for whatever the difference might be, I don't know. I probably would have said yes to that too, because we were not going to wait 10 years with that there. There's no way. And then the what if game, that scared me when I saw in the article that there were 2 fires. I mean, if there are water soluble chemicals in this building and we are sending firefighters to spray water on a fire that we didn't know was there, yeah, this community needs to step up. It's going to cost us taxpayer dollars to do the right thing. For any one firefighter is worth a whole heck of a lot more than whatever the difference may or may not be. So it's easy to look back in retrospect and say, why didn't we catch all of it in due diligence? But if you go back in the record, we still knew there was a chance that it was more. I remember asking Brandon, is this the worst case scenario, right? And you said, it's what we think is worst case scenario. And it's worse than that, right? And so I still have anxiety about additional cost, but I would have had way more anxiety about sitting on that thing in that place for all of the years that it would take for the private owner to handle it, if ever.
Chair, just one other clarification from the article that I think is fair to make. The seller who sold us the property did so after her husband passed away. My feeling is she really didn't know what was in that building. And I think it was unfairly characterized as a family business that's in Willard that owned it, and that's not true. It was a Sempra corporation that owned it, and I think in fairness to that business in Willard, that was unfairly represented, and I don't want to see their business besmirched because of that. I just thought I would like to correct that.
Thank you. I promise to get back to you, Luis. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple quick comments and questions. My first question is, knowing what we know now, is there any legal recourse or liability on the previous owners of these property for what they store there that we have to pursue?
Can I, before I give that to Gary, I think that's a difficult one for us to answer right now because we don't know enough, and I don't know that we want to expose legal strategy. So yeah, I think everything's on the table still, and I think we're willing to look at that, but I don't know that we know enough yet to do that. But
Right.
when that happens, I think we would be sitting down with you and talking about it.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate the fact that that's probably being considered. Obviously.
Nothing's off the table.
Okay. My other 2 comments real quick is, one, I know that I'm always very critical of sometimes certain things that happen, and I'm outspoken about it. And if in this situation that is happening now, I didn't do the opposite, which is to just basically echo what's been said by all of you here and praise the work that happened, and praise the people that put in all this work and all this effort and all this time to do the best they could to clean up and to acquire that property that we all felt could be a risk to the community. Then if I didn't say that and praise the people for that, then I will feel really bad about it. So I just want to say that and thank you. And the last comment I have, Chair, is you've often heard me a lot. You've heard me talk about our citizens coming here to speak and them not having the ability when we're having these conversations, when we're done, to come back somehow to give us their feedback after this debate and these conversations have been happening, after they ask questions. We always have the last word, and I've said it before. I don't like that. I know that we've made improvements in our norms to allow for more public engagement, but this is one example of how I think and feel that maybe some of our citizens here may feel like they want to come back and comment. And I'm not saying that we have to do that now, because I'm not about to suggest that we break our norms. But what I'm saying is I really wish we, take a little more time. It's not that hard. I don't think it's that hard to think about a way. This doesn't happen that often. This happens 2 or 3 times a year that we have these kinds of really deep discussions, and the public leaves, I think, feeling a little powerless, that they couldn't come back and address us with their reaction to the conversation that just happened here. And it's against the norms to clap, just so you know. I'm just kidding. I'm serious, but I'm kidding. I'm kidding and I'm serious. So, as you know, Chair, it's just my way to air and bring about what I think is very important that we should address.
I think it is within our norms, unless I'm corrected, that if we want to make a motion to open public comment again after we continue our dialogue, I don't think that's out of bounds.
We have an expert on our norms.
Yeah.
Well, there was one other thing that, I think we kind of talked around a little bit, was like, what else could we be paying for with the BDO? I don't know if you want to talk about the BDO revenue at all, Brandon. That might be,
I've got that
it's
one.
the one thing that I have left on the list that I don't know that we've addressed.
We have money budgeted currently. We're suspecting that it may not be quite enough, and if so, then we will look through where we can find money to come suggest to be able to pay that. Most of the one-time money that we have available as a city comes from the BDO lease revenue money. And granted, if we take it from there, we'll be taking it from funds that maybe could be used somewhere else. But again, the life safety issues, in my opinion, have to trump anything else we probably could have done with that money. So, but that, I don't know where we would come up with more money yet. That would be something we'd have to sit down and work on. If I don't know for 2 or 3 years, I don't really know how long this is going to be before somebody comes and says, this is your portion, pay this. I don't know when that is. We're working on the demolition side right now, trying to get bids so that as soon as EPA is done, we can take down the building.
Ralph, you coming back? Are you coming back? I had a comment and I wanted to say to Ralph.
Yeah.
So. Sorry, go ahead.
Did that answer your question?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure we addressed.
So Ralph is gone, but the comment I was going to make, in addition to what you said about the public interaction, is I wanted to apologize to Ralph because I noticed that I asked Chalet and Sue if I covered everything. And as soon as I did and they started to talk back, I thought I shouldn't have done that because it invited a violation of our norms. And so when Ralph tried to do the same innocently, I cut him off because I had told myself I already made that mistake once. I'm not going to make it twice. Yeah. But Ralph doesn't know that, what I thought in my mind.
Yeah.
All Ralph thought was, you let them talk, but you didn't let me talk. And I wanted to tell him that before he left, and I'm really hurt. I'm upset. Yeah, I'm sad that he left. And so I will call him and tell him that because he needs to know that. I don't want him to think, what is it about me that I don't get to talk with? What is it about them that they get to? That's my fault, not his. Okay, the issue of the BDO lease revenue.
Oh, yeah.
Does that cover it?
I think so.
Okay.
To answer the question.
I think the quote in the paper, I think context was important. We are, I don't remember the exact quote, but we are very blessed to have BDO lease revenue in this community. I guess the context of that quote, some people took it to mean that we flippantly use BDO revenue. That's not the case. Oh, I really appreciated Chief Mathieu. Did he already? Oh, there. I really appreciate the clarification on the container
There
thing.
he is.
He came back. Don't leave again until I really appreciate the clarification on the containers because to me, I was like, something is not right. There is no way we underestimated by that much. There's just like, I have suspended judgment on that issue, thinking something's not right, right? And you brought tremendous clarity, so thank you. And also, I really appreciate that you came to this mic and talked about the work that you and others have been doing. Because when you come here and you talk to us, speaking for myself, I believe you because I have always gotten the truth from you. We always have. That's my opinion. you are a man of character who comes with that character and credibility to the mic, and that means a ton to me. So thank you for being that man.